Hello, everyone. Welcome again to Bible study. We're going to dive on in. So, if you're just joining us, welcome. Daniel chapter 5, picking up in verse 13. Let me start sharing my screen. I should also, start introducing myself again, just in case anyone's like coming in halfway through the study. You're most welcome, by the way. I'm David, proud to be one of your pastors. Let me hit the play button. This is the fourth week of our 8-week study. Whoa. We're going verse by verse through Daniel. A bit of review that's going to be really important for tonight's lesson. So remember, Daniel is set in 6th century Babylon. Why 6th century Babylon? Because that's when and where the Jewish exiles were deported after King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon sacked Jerusalem. But Daniel was written some 400 years later in the 2nd century BC, so about 150 years before the birth of Jesus. The Greeks were in charge of the known world. They were in charge of Jerusalem, namely. It's quite possible that Daniel was written in or around Jerusalem, though we're not sure. It was a time of major cultural upheaval for Jews. If you and I were Jews in this time, we will be going, how Greek or how much like the surrounding culture should I be, right? Should I speak Greek? Should I send my kids to Greek schools? Should we worship the Greek gods? Should we buy food that could have been sacrificed to Greek gods, right? At every level of life, they had to make these decisions. What about participating in the surrounding culture might compromise my integrity to my faith, okay? And in this time, there were really two camps. There were those who really liked assimilation into the surrounding culture, and those who were really pushing against it. If we were to fast forward to Jesus's time, we see something very similar, where Jesus would get in arguments with Pharisees. Pharisees really pushed against assimilating into the surrounding culture. They wanted to be set apart. In fact, Pharisee comes from a word which means set apart. And he also got in debates with Sadducees, who were perfectly comfortable assimilating into the surrounding culture, okay? And Jesus can actually find ways where both can be right and both can be wrong, okay? Daniel was written during the 2nd century BC. Not only was it a time of cultural upheaval, it was a time of oppression, like major oppression coming from the Greek Empire. So here's what happened most immediately. We've spoken a little bit about this. It was the year 167 BC, all right? And there was a revolt in Jerusalem. Greeks had control of the city. The Jews took it back, all right? There was a Greek king, King Antiochus IV Epiphanes. All right. He is none too happy that the Jewish rebels have taken Jerusalem. So he comes in and lays Jerusalem to waste. Okay. Burns down the city, takes it back for the Greeks, what's left of it. And he bans Judaism, or the practice of Judaism, in Jerusalem. So Jews could no longer worship God in what remained of the temple, and he erected a statue to Zeus in the temple, okay? So there's a section of the Bible, though it's not the Protestant Bible, that deals with this time in Israel's history. It's the books of Maccabees. They're in what's called the Apocrypha. So if you grew up Catholic, or you have friends and relatives who are Catholic, the Maccabees are in the Catholic version of the Bible. Martin Luther, though, cut it out of the Protestant Bible, and it's not in our Bibles today. So this is 2 Maccabees chapter 5, verses 11 through 14. When these happenings were reported to the king, these happenings are that Jewish revolt taking over Jerusalem. He thought that Judea was in revolt. They kind of were. Raging like a wild animal, King Antiochus, he set out from Egypt and took Jerusalem by storm. He ordered his soldiers to cut down without mercy those whom they met, and to slay those who took refuge in their houses. there was a massacre of young and old, a killing of women and children, a slaughter of virgins and infants. In the space of 3 days, 80,000 were lost, 40,000 meeting a violent death, the same number being sold into slavery. So this was, when I say oppression, I mean real terror from the Greeks. Okay, and so this is, so not just terror, but oppression of Judaism, like suppression of Judaism, okay? 2 Maccabees chapter 6, verses 1 through 6. Not long after this, after what we just talked about, the king sent an Athenian senator to compel the Jews to forsake the laws of their ancestors and no longer to live by the laws of God, also to pollute the temple in Jerusalem, and to call it the temple of Olympian Zeus. So it's no longer the Jewish temple. It's a Greek temple now. And to call the one in Gerizim to the north of Jerusalem, the temple of Zeus, the friend of strangers, as did the people who lived in that place. Harsh and utterly grievous was the onslaught of evil, for the temple was filled with debauchery and reveling by the Gentiles who dallied with prostitutes and had intercourse with women within the sacred precincts, and besides brought in things for sacrifice that were unfit. One of the ways that Greeks and then later Romans would raise money to upkeep the temple was prostitution. And that was, the money actually went to pay the priests. It's terrible. That's what happened in the temple in Jerusalem. The altar was covered with abominable offerings that were forbidden by the laws. People could neither keep the Sabbath nor observe the festivals of their ancestors, nor so much as confess themselves to be Jews. We read this today and we go, my God, sounds like Nazi Germany. And though that's a really extreme example, people in Daniel's time would have felt similar levels of terror and suppression and evil. Okay, so a little bit, just one more bit of review before we dive in verse by verse. So the book of Daniel was likely written during all of that persecution we just talked about. Okay, so the time when Judaism was forbidden in Jerusalem was this 3-year period between 167 and 164 BC. Okay, so Daniel was likely written during that time when Judaism was outlawed. We also think it was written before yet another revolt, so the Maccabean revolt, which the Jewish festival of Hanukkah still remembers, was in the year 164. The Maccabees, who were Jews, family of Jewish priests, they take back the city again, this time for a longer period. Daniel doesn't know that that happened. So we know Daniel was written before that happened, but during all that persecution. So we have that 3-year window between 167 and 164. Why does Daniel write? Because he is living through a time of unprecedented death. How many times have we heard that before? And oppression and persecution and injustice. And he wants to give his folks a book of hope. 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 All people need is a little bit of hope these days. Oh, one more bit of review. So we're going to be seeing a switch in empires. So far in Daniel, we've been reading all under the Babylonian Empire, which lasted during this time, 605 BC to 539 BC. Then the Persian Empire takes over from the Babylonian Empire. We're going to see that transition tonight. The last Babylonian king, Belshazzar, who was a real historical figure, he would fall to the first Persian king, Cyrus the Great. Okay, chapter 5, verses 13 through 16. Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king said to Daniel, "So you are Daniel, one of the exiles of Judah, whom my father the king brought from Judah. I have heard of you, that a spirit of the gods is in you, and that enlightenment, understanding, and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now the wise men, the enchanters, have been brought in before me to read this writing and tell me its interpretation, but they were not able to give the interpretation of the matter. but I have heard that you can give interpretations and solve problems. Now, if you are able to read the writing and tell me its interpretation, you shall be clothed in purple, have a chain of gold around your neck, and rank third in the kingdom. All right. So from last week, we covered verses 1 through 13, 1 through 12 last week. Belshazzar, he doesn't know it yet, but he will be the last king of the Babylonian Empire. He throws this huge banquet. He and everybody there gets wildly inebriated. And he, in his stupidity, he calls for the holy vessels that had been used decades before in the temple in Jerusalem, before his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar tore it to the ground. Okay, these are holy vessels, not to be defiled, not to be used for anything except for sacrifice. Well, Belshazzar starts getting drunk off of wine in these vessels. Big no-no. All of a sudden, a disembodied hand starts writing on the wall, and nobody can understand the writing. He summons in Daniel to interpret it. Note that Belshazzar is meeting Daniel for the first time. Daniel, by this point, got to understand between Daniel chapter 1 and here in Daniel chapter 5, some 60 years have passed. Daniel's an old man by now, okay? Well, at least old man by this culture standards. By the time you're in your 70s, you're an old man. It's getting younger by the day, all right? He's an older man, got to be in at least his 70s. Belshazzar does not fear the God of the Jews like Nebuchadnezzar did. Last week, we reviewed Nebuchadnezzar's conversion to be a God-fearer, someone who worships the God of the Jews. Belshazzar, his descendant, does not fear the God of the Jews, nor does he know Daniel. Okay, verses 17 through 23. Excuse me. Then Daniel answered in the presence of the king, "Let your gifts be for yourself, or give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king and let him know the interpretation. O king, the Most High God gave your father Nebuchadnezzar kingship, greatness, glory, and majesty. And because of the greatness that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. He killed those he wanted to kill, kept alive those he wanted to keep alive, honored those he wanted to honor, and degraded those he wanted to degrade. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened so that he acted proudly, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and his glory was stripped from him. He was driven from human society, and his mind was made like that of an animal. His dwelling was with the wild asses. He was fed grass like oxen, and his body was bathed with the dew of heaven, until he learned that the Most High God has sovereignty over the kingdom of mortals and sets over it whomever he will." Let me just pause there and say that was a big lesson from last week, that Nebuchadnezzar was driven out of his mind and made to live for 7 years in a psychotic episode until he realized that the God of the Jews is Lord of Lords, is King, okay? It's a big deal for all of us to understand one day. God's in charge, not us, okay? Verse 22. And you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled your heart, even though you knew all this. You have exalted yourself against the Lord of heaven. The vessels of his temple you have brought in before you, and you and your lord, your wives and your concubines have been drinking wine from them. You have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see or hear or know, but the God of whose power is your very breath, and to whom belong all your ways, you have not honored. Okay. So here, Daniel does something that he has not done yet. He gives a prophecy. He inhabits the role of prophet. This is new. Daniel has not done that. He has not given a prophecy yet so far. Just a reminder, prophecy is not fortune telling. It's not about telling the future. Okay? That's the wrong idea about prophecy. Prophecy is forecasting. Prophecy is what your meteorologists do. Sometimes they get it right, sometimes they don't. All prophecy is telling the truth about the present and then predicting the consequences of today's patterns. So when you read through the Old Testament prophets, they're not that concerned about the future. They tell the truth about what's happening in the present. And then they give really hard but necessary truths about what must inevitably happen because we're doing all the wrong things today. The Old Testament prophets are saying, listen, today you people are turning away from God, abandoning your values. Therefore, these things must inevitably happen in the future because of what you've done today. They give those inconvenient truths. Okay, so Daniel tells the truth about who Belshazzar is in the present. Okay, he essentially says, you're an arrogant jerk, dude. You have not humbled your heart like Nebuchadnezzar did, like your ancestor did. When you knew he did, when you knew what happened to him, when he didn't do that, you knew all this, and yet you chose to be a narcissist. You chose to put yourself at the center of the universe. Therefore, bad things are coming for you. Okay. So I wonder, you can put this in the chat, what are some other prophets in the Old Testament that you can think of who spoke truth to power? Okay. They had to tell a really inconvenient truth that would get them in trouble, and they had to speak truth to the people in power. So as we go on, I just want to know who you think of. Okay. Now, another big problem for Daniel here is idolatry. So it says here, you have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. So not only is Belshazzar's problem one of pride and putting himself at the center, it's also idolatry. Okay, I just want to unpack idolatry for a second. So remember, people of this time would worship not just multiple gods, but they would worship these figurines and statues that were said to point to those gods. All right. Remember, idols can't think for themselves, right? Those gods don't exist. We only project our own selves onto what people would call gods. We project our shadow side onto them. So I was thinking about this week and how to teach idolatry. And I thought about the sacraments. So in seminary, they teach you what a sacrament is. And I'll just give you, this is seminary, okay? You did not have to pay all this money to learn what a sacrament is, all right? What a sacrament is an outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace. When you come forward for communion, the bread and the wine, they are outward and visible. You can see them, touch them, smell them, taste them. They're a sign of something inside that you can't see, a gift, a grace that God has given inside of it. Okay. Idols really are the exact opposite of a sacrament. Idols are this outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual illness. So we take the shadow sides of ourselves, kind of the worst parts of ourselves, and then we project them outward into the world. Okay, so I'm going to ask you again to engage the chat. What are the idols of our time? So I'll just start. So, for example, money. We make money an idol, right? But why is it? It's because it is this outward and visible thing, something we can touch and see, that we have put our own inward and spiritual illnesses onto, our feelings of scarcity, our need for more and more and more, our need to measure ourselves by profit, right? We put all of that onto money. The money doesn't do that. The money doesn't talk. We put that onto money, right? So what are other things that we do that to? Those are idols. Put that in the chat. Let me check the chat. So let's see. You've reviewed some Bible, some prophets of the Bible. John the Baptist, yes, definitely spoke truth to power. Got him in trouble. He lost his head for it. Nathan and Amos, yes. Just in case y'all, no one knows, Nathan spoke truth to King David when King David had Uriah the Hittite killed in the Bathsheba scandal. Amos, yes, Amos, when he saw the oppression of the poor, he spoke truth to the kings. Jeremiah, Isaiah, Samuel, Jesus, yes, Jesus was a prophet. Ezekiel, Elijah, yes. Good, y'all know your prophets. All right, some idols of our time. Power, yes, very good. We all, the inward and spiritual illness would be, we feel powerless, right? Even though we might have lots of power in the world, we still feel so insecure and powerless. We project that onto power. Status and stuff, there's that scarcity and fear again. We project that onto our stuff. Yes, celebrity. Yes. We feel invisible. We feel like we don't matter. And so we project all that shadow stuff onto celebrities. Yes, cars and houses, pride. I just want you to see how the idols of our time tell us something about ourselves, the darker parts of ourselves. We project it onto those. All right, I've beaten a dead horse, you understand. Thank you. All right. So Daniel is going to give this interpretation. So I'm back in chapter 5, verses 24 through 31. Daniel says, so from his presence, God's presence, so from his presence, the hand was sent, and this writing was inscribed. And this is the writing that was inscribed. Mene, Tekel, and Parsin. Okay. Mene, Tekel, and Parsin. This is the interpretation of the matter. Mene, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Just one of my favorite verses in all scripture. And Paris, or Parsin. Paris is the singular of Parsin. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and Daniel was clothed in purple. A chain of gold was put around his neck, and a proclamation was made concerning him that he should rank third in the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. All right, what the heck just happened? Mene, Tekel, and Parsin. You're going, those are strange words. Of course they are. They're not even Hebrew. They're Aramaic. Remember, this entire section of Daniel, from most of chapter 2 all the way to chapter 8, is not written in Hebrew. It's written in Aramaic, okay? The vast majority of the Old Testament is written in Hebrew. There are a few parts written in Aramaic, and this is one of the select few parts. Mene, Tekel, and Parsin are Aramaic words, which means that Belshazzar, who spoke and probably could have read Aramaic, understood what the writing on the wall was. So it's not like this disembodied hand came and wrote in a language he couldn't understand. Right? That's not what happened. He understood the words. He just didn't know what they meant for him. Okay. So Mene is the Aramaic word for numbered. It means Daniel is saying the days of your kingdom are numbered, they are finite, and they are coming to an end. Okay. Then weighed, which is Tekel. He's saying you lack this. You have been weighed, O king. You lack the substance of character to be king. Okay. I just love that idea that God measures us. He says, you have been weighed and found wanting. Okay. And then divided, Parsin. your kingdom will now be divided between the Medes and the Persians. So this actually did happen in history. The Babylonian Empire was divided into these two different empires. The Medes, okay, who kind of were lost to history. They took the northern part of the Babylonian Empire, and the Persians. The Persians took the south part, including Jerusalem. The Persians would then take over the Median part, the Medes part. That's why the Medes are really lost to history. You may have seen, there's a great movie where this verse is played. I tried to play it for all tonight, but it didn't work. If you ever saw A Knight's Tale with Heath Ledger, may he rest in peace. This is one of his great movies. He watch it sometime. It's a great movie. Heath Ledger plays this this knight. It's actually based on a Chaucer tale, who is not supposed to be a knight. He's a peasant, but he pretends to be a knight, and he unseats one of these great lords who is just a terrible jerk. And he tells this line to this knight: "You have been weighed, you have been measured, and you have been found wanting." I just love that. Just a great line for all these people in our lives who lack substance of character. That's what Daniel tells Belshazzar. So in the story, Belshazzar dies that night. The Persians take over that night, and the Babylonian kingdom ends. Daniel is clothed in purple. Purple is the color of royalty, and he's made third in power over the entire kingdom. That doesn't really matter that much, given that the kingdom ends that night, okay? It says that Darius the Mede received the kingdom. What's interesting is Darius the Mede didn't exist. He just didn't exist. We can't find him. Like, nothing in history says there was such a thing as Darius the Mede, okay? There was a Median kingdom, we know that, but we can't find any Mede king named Darius, okay? Remember, Daniel wrote about 400 years after the fall of Babylon. So what we think happened is that whoever wrote Daniel, got a little confused with the history here. He's probably referring to Cyrus of Persia. That Darius here doesn't refer to a Median king, refers to the Persian king named Cyrus, who did, historically speaking, kill Belshazzar and take over the kingdom. Okay. Taking time. Oh, we're doing great. If y'all have any questions in the chat, please do put them. But I'm going to go on to chapter 6. So that part of the story is closed. Chapter 6, verses 1 through 9. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps stationed throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 presidents, including Daniel. To these the satraps gave account, so the king might suffer no loss. Soon Daniel distinguished himself above all the other presidents and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king planned to appoint him over the whole kingdom. So the presidents and the satraps tried to find grounds for complaint against Daniel in connection with the kingdom, but they could find no grounds for complaint or any corruption because he was faithful, and no negligence or corruption could be found in him. The men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." So the presidents and satraps conspired and came to the king and said to him, "O King Darius, live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the counselors and the governors are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an interdict." I'm probably saying that word wrong, but I know what it means. That whoever prays to anyone, divine or human, for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into a den of lions. Now, O king, establish the interdict and sign the document so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document and interdict. Okay. A satrap is a governor, okay? They would rule over different regions of the empire. These presidents were set over them. Daniel is one of them. The satrap's job would have been to collect taxes, okay? It says here, so that the king may not lose, so that the king might suffer no loss. Essentially, the king wants what's coming to him. He wants the tax money. And so these satraps were charged with collecting the correct revenue from the poor. All right. Well, it seems like Daniel's doing a very, very good job. Daniel is the golden boy. That's just a theme throughout Daniel. And it's looking like Darius is going to make him the chief president over the whole empire. His peers, the presidents and his subordinates, are not too happy with that. They can't find that Daniel is skimming off the top. There's no corruption there. So what do? They try to get Darius to pass this ban on worship or prayer to any god except to him. Okay, so they really trick Darius into banning all other religion in the Persian Empire except emperor worship, except worshiping Darius. Why? Because they know Daniel's a man of honor. They know Daniel's it's just a trap, a perfect trap set for Daniel. There's no way Daniel's going to worship Darius. So the reason I did all that review at the beginning of tonight's lesson is there's a clear parallel to what's happening in Jerusalem while Daniel is writing the book of Daniel. There was a ban on Judaism in Jerusalem, desecration of the temple. That's what's happening here in the book of Daniel, okay? There is a ban on Judaism and all religion in the empire, okay, except worshiping of the king. There would have been worship of the Greek emperor when Daniel was written. Okay. Chapter 6, verse 10 through 18. Although Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he continued to go up to his house, which had windows in its upper room open toward Jerusalem, to get down on his knees 3 times a day, to pray to his God and praise him, just as he had done previously. So Daniel doesn't miss a beat. He knows this ban has been passed. He doesn't stop. Verse 11. The conspirators came and found Daniel praying and seeking mercy before his God, exactly as they planned it. Then they approached the king and said concerning the interdict, which just means ban, by the way, O king, did you not sign an interdict, a ban, that anyone who prays to anyone divine or human within 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into a den of lions? The king answered, the thing stands fast, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be revoked. Then they responded to the king, Daniel, one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the interdict you have signed, but he is saying his prayers 3 times a day. When the king heard the charge, he was very much distressed. He was determined to save Daniel. And until the sun went down, he made every effort to rescue him. Then the conspirators came to the king and said to him, Know, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and Persians that no interdict or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed. Then the king gave the command, and Daniel was brought and thrown into the den of lions. The king said to Daniel, May your God, whom you faithfully serve, deliver you. A stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, so that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No food was brought to him, and sleep fled from him. So Daniel is caught, just as the conspirators planned, worshiping the God of Israel. Note the triangulation here. If you don't know what the word triangulation means, trust me, you've been triangulated. It's when there's conflict between you and somebody else, but that person, instead of confronting you, goes to somebody else, tries to use that person to get what they want out of you. It happens to us all. Instead of confronting Daniel, these conspirators, they confront the king. All right. They use the king to get what they want to happen to Daniel. All right. Essentially, they're cowards, and they use the king. I want you to note a few parallels here between Daniel and the lion's den and Easter. Okay, and Easter. Note here that the king sealed this den with his own signet ring. So a signet ring was like a signature. In fact, the word signature comes from the word signet, signature, signet. What it was is you'd have a ring. Okay, you'd have a ring set with a kind of emblem that only you could use, only that person who wore the ring could use. You would set it in hot wax, and that would be your signature, okay? The imprint of that ring on the wax, all right? So Darius comes, seals the enclosure of the den with hot wax, presses his signet ring into it. Something similar happens in Matthew chapter 27, okay? When Jesus is put into Joseph of Arimathea's tomb, Matthew says it was sealed. Pilate sealed the stone with the insignia of the emperor. Okay? It was a way of saying even the emperor has ordered that this stone is to be sealed. Okay? So Christians throughout church history have seen a parallel between Easter and Daniel and the lion's den, where you have a king, an emperor, sealing a stone, wanting someone to be trapped in a den, in a tomb. Okay. I just want to unpack a little bit this imagery of lion's den. Okay. So the den is supposed to represent the situation of hopelessness. Okay. Daniel's, left for dead down there. He's truly in a situation of hopelessness. There's no way he can get out. Surely the lions are going to eat him overnight. Also note the parallel. Daniel spends overnight in the tomb. Jesus spends more than one night. He spends 2 nights, 3 days. And the lions are supposed to be these gatekeepers of hopelessness. Okay, they're the ones who keep Daniel trapped. There are just so many layers of meaning here, where the conspirators are kind of lions themselves, devouring Daniel, keeping him in this hopeless situation. The Greeks who sacked Jerusalem in real time when Daniel writes, they are like lions, gatekeepers of hopelessness. If this were the Easter story, then the tomb where Jesus is laid would be the den, and the Roman guards who stand guard at the tomb, they would be the lions, gatekeepers of this hopeless situation. But note that both in the lion's den story and in the Easter story, not just the tomb is defeated, not just the den is defeated, but the gatekeepers are defeated too. The lions and those guards. The Gospels say that they faint, they are struck like dead. Okay. Chapter 6, verses 19 through 24. Then at break of day, the king got up and hurried to the den of lions. When he came near the den where Daniel was, he cried out anxiously to Daniel, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you faithfully serve, been able to deliver you from the lions?" Daniel then said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths so that they would not hurt me, because I was found blameless before him and also before you, O king. I have done no wrong." Then the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. The king gave a command, and those who had accused Daniel were brought and thrown into the den of lions. Ouch. They, their children, and their wives. More ouch. Before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces. Ouch, ouch. So I want you to note how King Darius is portrayed here. It's kind of positive, right? You have Darius trying to save Daniel the night before. He's respectful of Daniel. He's a little aloof. If there's anything negative to be said about him. The Old Testament, as a rule, has a kind of positive outlook on the Persians. And the reason is because historically, and we see this in other books of the Bible, the Persian king Cyrus will send the Jewish exiles back to Jerusalem. He sets them free from exile, sends them home. So they kind of have, the Old Testament kind of has this positive outlook on them. It says here in verse 19, then at break of day, the king got up and hurried to the den of lions. Another allusion to Easter, where I'm thinking of the gospel according to John, at break of day, at dawn, Mary of Magdalene runs to the tomb, okay? It's Sunday morning at break of day. So why is Daniel saved? Like, what bails him out? Two things. It says he is blameless, verse 22 here, because I was found blameless before him. Blameless means he did not compromise his integrity to God. And he trusted God. He trusted God. Says here in verse 20, so 23. So Daniel was taken up out of the den. No kind of harm was found on him because he had trusted in his God. So just imagine this is the context that Daniel was writing in, the persecution of Jews in Jerusalem. Jerusalem has been destroyed. Suppression of Judaism. Daniel wants people to be blameless. Don't compromise your integrity. I know it's hard, but don't give up. Continue worshiping the God of Israel and trust. I know things look bleak right now. I know it looks like we lost. We kind of have, but you still got to trust. You still have to trust. Last week, or I think it was maybe it was the week before last, we talked about the great reversal. We see this over and over again in the Gospels of Jesus, where the powerful are brought low and the lowly are lifted up. We see this is a great reversal story here. The powerful, all these conspirators, and unfortunately their families, are brought low. Daniel, the lowly, is lifted up. Finally, this is where we're going to end tonight, verses 25 through 28. Then King Darius wrote to all peoples and nations of every language throughout the whole world, may you have abundant prosperity. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion, people should tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion has no end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, for he has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Okay. So remember when Nebuchadnezzar we saw this back in chapter 3, he saw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego survive the furnace. Similar thing happens where Nebuchadnezzar issues a decree that everyone should respect the God of those people. Same thing here. Darius issues a decree where everyone should worship Daniel's God. We spoke last week about how that furnace story and the lion's den story have the same meaning. They are supposed to be parallel stories in the book of Daniel. The meaning is this: our primary allegiance is to God. Therefore, sometimes civil disobedience or disobedience to the worldly authorities is sometimes warranted. So look here, I'm back here in the story, chapter 6, verse 22. Daniel says, I was found blameless before him, God, and also before you, O king. I have done no wrong. Technically, Daniel has done wrong. He broke the law. There was a law. He wasn't supposed to worship any other God. He broke the law. He did do wrong. Daniel says, I have done no wrong. But that depends on which authority he's talking about. The king's authority, the king's law, or God's authority, God's law. To God's law, he's done no wrong. To the law of the land, he has done wrong. When those two are in conflict, Daniel is saying, you got to choose. You got to choose. And when those are in conflict, sometimes disobedience is warranted. And finally, Daniel is a resurrection story. Okay. I just love this final parallel to Easter. You really never see how resurrection happens in the Gospels. All we know is that Jesus went into the tomb and then he appears alive on the other side. Like, we have no cameras in his tomb showing us how resurrection happened. There are no cameras in the lion's den showing us exactly how Daniel survived the lions. He talks about an angel. Well, how did the angel get in? How did the angel shut the lion's mouths? We don't know. We don't see it. We're just supposed to trust that resurrection happens. And we do experience it. We experience it every day. I mean, you and I, friends, we're still here. We're still making it through the pandemic. We believe that those whom we have lost in the pandemic, we're going to see them again. We're going to see them again. So let's make this very practical. I want you to go to menti.com, menti.com. This is how we're going to end tonight with this Menti poll. Open up another web browser or on your phone, menti.com. You're going to enter in this code at the top, 1620 5720. 1620 5720. You're going to be allowed to enter in 3 responses to this question. We, as in you and me in real time, we are in a lion's den. Not in terms of space, but in terms of time in the pandemic. What do you hope to see when God breaks us out of the lion's den? What do you hope to see? Remember, Daniel, the book of Daniel intends for the lion's den story to be a message of hope, that the lion's den doesn't last forever. You may be in the lion's den right now. It doesn't last forever. You will see something when God breaks us all out. So what do you hope to see when God breaks us out? Hope to see God and Jesus? Yes. I'll shut up for a few moments and let y'all read the great things coming in here. Okay. At first glance, I am just really fascinated by how some of y'all interpreted this this question, because some of y'all, I can tell, interpreted this question meaning that the lion's den is this life. And what do you hope to see when God breaks us out of this life in the resurrection? Like life in heaven. I see life in heaven here. Hoping to see God and Jesus. And really, that's not a wrong interpretation. It's a very interesting interpretation that there is a sense in which life kind of is a lion's den, and there will always be lions. And we do believe God's going to break us out one day. And then I can see that a lot of y'all interpreted the lion's den to be this time in the pandemic, that we hope to see unity come out of this. Someone's going to go to Italy. Good for you. I love that. I love that. You want to see your loved ones. You want to see your relatives. And the most dominant answer is peace. Peace. You want to see peace. That is a very different answer than Daniel gives. Note how the lion's den story ends. How? With all these people getting eaten by the lions. It ends with violence. So Daniel does hope to see like justice done to the oppressors, right? The Persian oppressors and the Greek oppressors who forbid the practice of Jerusalem. We, though, I'm seeing that we have a different hope. We don't want to see revenge. We want to see peace. Thank y'all. Next week, read Daniel chapter 7 through 8 for me, okay? I have not planned this yet. That's what Fridays are for. So I'm not sure if we're going to get through all of chapter 8, but go ahead and read all of chapter 8. We will get through all of chapter 7. There will be a change in this reading. You're going to go, oh my goodness, it's like I'm reading a different book. We're entering into the second half of Daniel. Daniel's split in two halves. And you're going to go, same book, but now we're going to go to the prophecies. And the lion's den story is kind of this, this bridge between the two. All right, friends, send me questions, send me prayer requests over email, send me life updates. All are wonderful. See you next week.